You are not being asked what you can give. You are being told what has already been assigned. Land has been measured, output has been estimated, and a number now follows you through each cycle. It does not adjust when conditions shift. It does not pause when circumstances change. It remains, and everything else begins to move around it. There is no single moment where pressure arrives. It builds through records, through time, and through the quiet expectation that each entry will be fulfilled. When it is not, the system does not argue. It continues carrying the difference forward and returning to it again. You will see how obligation is created in ancient Rome, how it is recorded, and how it is enforced without urgency or force. You will see how value is assigned, how debt takes shape, and how the system maintains control simply by remembering. If this quiet structure holds your attention, you are welcome to continue. The record begins before any payment is due. You are placed within an ancient Roman administrative district where households are counted, named, and fixed in relation to land, labor, and obligation. The household is identified, and within it individuals are named, counted, and fixed in relation to land, labor, and obligation. The system does not look for personality or circumstance. It looks for a position. You are not considered alone. You are part of a unit that can be measured. A census official works through a district with a clear sequence. Settlements are approached in an order that reflects administrative boundaries, not convenience. Each household is visited or summoned. The head of the household is expected to present information that can be confirmed, not debated. Names are listed, ages are noted. Relationships are defined in simple terms that fit into existing categories. Land is described next. Boundaries are stated and, when possible, matched against prior records. The system prefers continuity. If a field was recorded in the last count, it is expected to exist in the same form now. Changes require explanation, and explanation requires acknowledgement by the official recording it. The emphasis is not on accuracy in a modern sense. It is in consistency with what is already written. Tools, animals, and production capacity are observed in a general way. A household that maintains plow animals is understood differently than one that does not. Storage spaces, whether full or empty, indicate potential rather than present condition. The system is not measuring a moment. It is defining a baseline. You notice that the official does not rush. The process is steady and repetitive. Each entry follows a structure that has been used before. There is little room for variation. When information does not fit easily, it is adjusted to match the form rather than the other way around. The form holds authority. Status is assigned as the record is created: citizen, non-citizen, landholder, tenant, trader. These categories are not descriptions. They are instructions for what follows. Once placed, they determine how the system will return to this household in the future. Movement between categories is possible, but it is slow and requires recognition from the same system that assigned the original status. The act of being counted is not treated as an event. It is treated as maintenance. The official records confirms and moves on. There is no indication that this moment carries weight, but everything that follows depends on it. The information is written onto materials designed to last long enough to be useful. Wax tablets may be used for initial notes, but the important entries are transferred to more durable records. Copies are created. One may remain local. Another is sent upward through the administrative chain. Redundancy ensures that the system does not rely on a single point of failure. You see that the person being recorded has little control over how they are represented. They provide information, but the structure determines how that information is shaped. A field becomes a measure of yield, a family becomes a count of dependence, a trade becomes a category of income. Details that do not serve the system are not preserved. Once entered, the record becomes part of a larger network. It is no longer tied to the moment in which it was created. It can be referenced later, compared against future entries, and used to identify changes that require attention. The individual is now visible in a way that can be revisited. There is no clear beginning or end to this process. It occurs in cycles, and each cycle builds on the last. What is written now will influence what is expected next. The system does not need to know everything. It needs to know enough to assign a place and return to it with purpose. You remain in the background as the official finishes the entry. The household is reduced to a set of values that can be carried forward. Nothing has been taken. Nothing has been demanded. The system has only observed and recorded. That is enough to begin. The number casually appears. After the household is recorded, the system moves from identification to expectation. The information gathered is translated into a value that represents what the household is required to provide. This value is not discovered through direct measurement of current conditions. It is assigned through a structure that relies on known patterns, prior records, and standardized rates. You observe how land is converted into yield. Fields are not evaluated for their current state in detail. Instead, they are placed into categories based on size, type, and historical output. A plot that has produced a certain amount in the past is expected to produce in a similar range again. Variation is acknowledged but not built into the core calculation. The system applies rates that have been determined elsewhere. These rates reflect administrative decisions about what a region should contribute. They are not negotiated at the level where they are applied. Local officials take these rates and fit them to the recorded information. The process is practical rather than precise. The goal is to produce a usable figure. Trade is treated in a similar way. A merchant's activity is estimated based on scale, location, and known patterns of exchange. Detailed accounting is rare. Instead, the system relies on categories that approximate volume. A small trader is assigned one level of obligation. A larger operation is assigned to another. The distinctions are broad but consistent. You notice that the assessment does not attempt to match exact reality. It aims to create a stable expectation. Stability allows the system to plan and to collect without needing to reassess constantly. The assigned number becomes the reference point, even if conditions shift. Local officials play a critical role in this stage. They understand the area and its general capacity. They interpret central directives and apply them in a way that produces a coherent set of obligations across the district. Their decisions are influenced by prior records. A sudden change in assessment draws attention and requires justification. Continuity is preferred. There is a practical limit to how much variation the system will accept. If one household is assessed far below its neighbors, it creates imbalance. If it is assessed far above, it risks non-collection. The official adjusts within a narrow range to keep the system functioning smoothly. Precision is less important than alignment. The number, once established, is written into the record alongside the identifying information. It is treated as a fact. There is no visible process for immediate dispute. If adjustments are possible, they occur later and through formal channels that require time and recognition. For now, the number stands. You see that the system does not revisit the logic behind the assessment each time it is used. The calculation happens once in a structured way and the result is carried forward. This reduces the need for repeated evaluation and keeps the administrative process efficient. There is also a separation between those who determine the rates and those who apply them. This distance reinforces the authority of the assessment. The local official can explain how the number was applied, but not why the rate exists in its current form. The origin of the rate is outside the immediate interaction. As the assessment is finalized, It becomes the basis for all future actions related to this household. Payment schedules, enforcement measures, and records of compliance will all refer back to this figure. It is the point around which the rest of the system organizes itself. You notice that nothing in this process requires urgency. The work is steady and deliberate. The number is not presented as a demand at this moment. It is recorded as an expectation that will be addressed later. The household now exists in two forms. It is a place with people, land, and activity. It is also a value that has been assigned and recorded. The second form is the one the system will return to. The assessment is complete. The number remains. The number does not remain where it is first written. You follow it as it moves from temporary notation into structured record. The initial entry, often made on a wax tablet, is not considered stable enough to hold authority. It serves as a working surface, a place where information is gathered and shaped. Once confirmed, the contents are transferred into a more durable form. A clerk sits with the tablet and a prepared scroll. The transfer is careful and methodical. Names are rewritten, classifications are restated, and the assessed value is entered alongside them. The act of copying is not mechanical, it is a second confirmation. If something appears inconsistent with prior records, it is noticed here. You see that records are not isolated. Each entry is linked to earlier versions. A household is expected to appear again with similar structure and comparable values. The system relies on this continuity. When the clerk writes a name, there is an expectation that it has been written before. Multiple copies are created. One remains at the local level, accessible to officials who will manage collection and enforcement. Another is sent upward, often to a regional administrative center. This duplication is not for convenience. It is a safeguard. If one record is damaged or lost, the system continues to function through the other. Storage is deliberate. Scrolls are rolled, labeled, and placed in containers that protect them from handling and environment. Access is controlled. Not every official can alter a record. The authority to write, copy, or amend is limited to specific roles. Once the entry is placed into this system, it gains a different quality. It is no longer a note about a household. It is part of an archive. It can be retrieved, compared, and used as evidence of obligation. The written form holds more weight than memory or verbal agreement. You notice that corrections are possible, but not simple. If an error is discovered, it must be addressed through the same system that created the record. An official must recognize the mistake, document the change, and ensure that all copies reflect the correction. Until that process is complete, the original entry remains active. The persistence of the record changes how time is experienced. The assessment is no longer tied to the moment it was calculated. It exists independently, ready to be referenced at any point. When the next cycle begins, the previous record is already present. It shapes what is expected without needing to be recreated. There is also a layering effect. New entries do not erase old ones. They are added alongside them. Over time, a sequence forms. Each record shows what was expected, what was paid, and what remained. This sequence allows the system to identify patterns. Stability, decline, irregularity. All of it becomes visible through comparison. You observe how authority is reinforced through this process. The individual does not carry the obligation alone. The record carries it as well. Even if a person leaves, changes status, or attempts to reset their position, the written record remains as a point of reference. The materials themselves show signs of handling over time. Edges soften, ink fades slightly, but the structure holds. The system does not rely on perfect preservation. It relies on redundancy and repetition. If one record weakens, another supports it. Access to these records is purposeful. They are not consulted casually. When opened, it is for a reason: to confirm a payment, to identify a shortfall, to prepare for collection. The act of retrieving a record is part of the system's operation, not a passive activity. You remain in the room as the scroll is completed and placed with others. It joins a set that represents an entire district. Each scroll contains multiple entries, each entry tied to a household, each household tied to an expectation. Nothing changes outwardly at this moment. No goods are moved, no demands are made. But the obligation has been fixed in a form that does not fade with time. The record now exists beyond the person it describes. It waits. Time gives the record direction. The obligation, once written, is placed within a schedule that defines when it must be addressed. The system does not operate in a continuous flow. It moves in cycles, and each cycle includes a period for collection. You see how these periods are set. They align with administrative rhythms that extend across regions. Officials at different levels expect activity at the same time. Reports are prepared, collections are gathered, and transfers are made in a sequence that repeats each year. Agricultural cycles influence this timing. Harvest periods are considered when determining when payment is due. But this consideration does not guarantee flexibility. It simply establishes a general alignment. Within that alignment, the system expects consistency. A date is attached to the obligation. It is not presented as a suggestion. It is part of the structure. When the date arrives, the system assumes readiness. There is no mechanism that pauses the schedule based on individual conditions. You notice that time is not tracked in isolation. It is connected to the record. Each entry includes not only what is owed, but when it is expected. This pairing allows the system to identify compliance and deficiency without needing to reassess the situation in detail. As the collection period approaches, activity increases in a controlled way. Local officials review records. They identify which households are due and prepare to receive payment. The preparation is administrative. Lists are checked, totals are calculated. The process is organized before any interaction occurs. The day of collection does not arrive with urgency. It arrives as part of a known sequence. Individuals are aware of the timing because it repeats. The system does not need to announce it each time. It is understood through repetition. When payment is made, it is recorded against the existing entry. The act of payment is not the end of the process. It is an update within it. The record is marked to show that the obligation for that cycle has been met, partially met, or left outstanding. If payment is not made by the expected time, the system does not pause. It marks the absence. A new state is created within the record. The obligation shifts from due to overdue. This shift is immediate and requires no additional decision. You observe how this transition is handled. There is no visible escalation at the moment. The record is simply updated. But this update changes how the system will interact with the individual moving forward. Future actions will be based on this new status. Time continues to move regardless of payment. The next cycle approaches even if the current one is unresolved. This overlap creates pressure without the need for direct enforcement. The individual is not only dealing with what is due now, but what will be due next. The calendar also structures the work of officials. They do not operate continuously across all tasks. They focus on collection during specific periods, then shift to recording, reporting, and preparation. This organization allows the system to function with limited resources while maintaining consistency. You see that the schedule is not adjusted easily. Changes require coordination across levels of administration. It is simpler for the individual to adapt to the schedule than for the system to adapt to the individual. The repetition of this cycle creates familiarity. Over time, the process becomes expected. The date arrives, the obligation is addressed, the record is updated, and the system moves forward. There is no single moment where pressure is applied. It is distributed across time. The approach of the date, the arrival of the collection period, the marking of payment or absence. Each step is quiet, but together they create a steady movement that does not stop. You remain aware of how little is required to maintain this structure: a date, a record, and a method of marking change. That is enough to keep the system in motion. The calendar does not demand attention. The calendar receives it. The system does not reach the individual directly. Between the recorded obligation and its fulfillment, there is a layer of people whose role is to carry the process forward. These are not distant officials. They operate within the same regions as the households they oversee. Their presence gives the system a local form. You observe how responsibility is assigned. A fixed amount is expected from a district. This amount is known before collection begins. The intermediary is tasked with delivering that amount to the next level of administration. How it is gathered within the district is managed locally. Some intermediaries hold formal positions. Others operate through contracted arrangements. In either case, their authority is defined by their responsibility to meet the assigned total. The system does not require them to follow a single method. It requires them to produce results. Records guide their work. Lists of households, assessed values, and payment schedules are reviewed in advance. The intermediary does not begin with uncertainty. They know who is expected to pay and how much is expected. This reduces the need for negotiation. You notice that the intermediary maintains a parallel record. While the central record holds the official obligation, the local record tracks interaction, payments received, delays noted, partial fulfillment. This second layer of documentation allows the intermediary to manage the process in real time. There is a practical incentive structure at work. When an intermediary is responsible for delivering a fixed sum, any amount collected beyond that requirement may be retained. This encourages thorough collection. It also introduces variation in how pressure is applied. Distance from central authority creates space for interpretation. The intermediary understands local conditions, relationships, and vulnerabilities. This knowledge shapes how collection is approached. Some households are addressed first because they are reliable. Others are approached with more persistence because they are not. You see that enforcement is rarely immediate or uniform. It unfolds through repeated contact, a reminder, a visit, a review of the record. Each interaction reinforces the expectation without needing to escalate quickly. The intermediary does not operate in isolation. They are known within the community. Their role is visible. This visibility reduces resistance. The system is not arriving from outside. It is present within the local structure. At the same time, the intermediary is accountable upward. Failure to deliver the expected amount has consequences. This pressure moves in both directions, from the state to the intermediary, and from the intermediary to the individual. You observe how this position requires balance. Excessive pressure can disrupt the community and reduce long-term collection. Insufficient pressure risks failing to meet the assigned total. The intermediary adjusts within this range, guided by experience rather than fixed instruction. There is also a reliance on existing relationships. The intermediary may know the households personally. This familiarity does not remove obligation, but it informs how it is enforced. A household with a consistent record of payment may be given time. Another with repeated shortfalls may be approached more directly. The system benefits from this flexibility. It allows collection to continue without constant intervention from higher levels. The intermediary absorbs variation and keeps the process moving. You notice that the individual does not interact with the abstract system. They interact with this person. The obligation, which exists in records and schedules, is experienced through these encounters. The intermediary carries the system into the local environment. They translate expectation into action. They manage the gap between what is recorded and what is received. Nothing about their presence is dramatic. They review, they note, they return. Over time, their role becomes part of the environment, as predictable as the schedule itself. The system remains structured, handled, but it is no longer distant. The number does not change when conditions do. You observe the difference begin to form. The assessed value remains fixed in the record, but the circumstances that support it shift over time. A field yields less than expected. Trade slows. Illness reduces labor capacity. These changes are visible in daily activity, but they are not immediately reflected in the system. The assessment was built on patterns. It assumes a level of consistency that is not always present. When that consistency breaks, the system does not adjust automatically. The expectation remains in place. You see how this creates a gap. The household continues to operate, producing what it can, but the output no longer aligns with the assigned obligation. The difference is not recorded at first. It exists as a condition, not yet as a formal entry. Reassessment is possible in theory, but in practice it is limited. It requires recognition from the same administrative structure that created the original value. This recognition takes time. It may depend on broader conditions being acknowledged across a region, not just within a single household. In the meantime, the obligation stands. The intermediary continues to work from the recorded figure. Payment is expected according to that figure, regardless of current capacity. You notice that the system does not treat this gap as an error, it treats it as part of the operating environment. Variation is expected, but it is managed through the existing structure rather than by altering it. Households respond in practical ways. Stored goods may be used to meet obligations. Livestock may be sold. Tools may be exchanged. These actions are not directed by the system, but they are shaped by it. The need to meet the recorded value influences decisions. Over time, these adjustments have limits. Resources that can be converted into payment are finite. Once they are used, the household operates with reduced capacity, making future alignment with the assessment more difficult. You observe that the system does not intervene to prevent this decline. Its role is not to maintain the household's condition. Its role is to maintain the expectation. The gap becomes more visible as the collection period approaches. The intermediary notes partial payments or delays. These are early signs that the recorded value and actual capacity are no longer aligned. There is no immediate correction. The system continues to apply the same structure. The individual is expected to close the gap through available means. You see how this process unfolds gradually. There is no single moment where the difference becomes critical. It increases over time, shaped by repeated cycles where the expectation remains steady and the outcome does not. Local officials may recognize the situation. They may understand that a household is operating below its assessed capacity, but recognition does not equal adjustment. Without formal change to the record, the obligation persists. The system relies on its stability. Adjusting assessments frequently would require constant review and reduce predictability. By holding the number steady, the system simplifies its operation, even if it creates strain at the individual level. You remain aware that the gap is not recorded as a separate category. It is implied through the difference between what is expected and what is delivered. Only when payment is formally missed does it become an entry in the record. Until that point, it exists as a condition that shapes behavior. It influences decisions about what to keep, what to sell, and what to defer. It narrows options without announcing itself. The household continues to operate within this space. Activity does not stop. Work continues, but the alignment with the system has shifted. The number remains unchanged. Everything else adjusts around it. The gap is given a form. When the expected amount is not met within the defined period, the system does not pause to reconsider the original assessment. It records the difference. What was once an unspoken imbalance between expectation and reality becomes a visible entry. You observe how this is done. The original obligation remains intact, it is not reduced or replaced. Instead, a notation is added alongside it, a portion unpaid, a sum carried forward. The language is simple, but the effect is precise. The system now recognizes two values where there was previously one. The unpaid amount does not disappear with the close of the cycle. It is preserved and moved into the next. The record now includes both the new expectation and the remaining balance from before. This layering creates continuity. Nothing is lost between periods. You notice that the transformation from obligation to debt does not require a new process. It uses the same structure that recorded the original assessment. The difference is in how the entry is interpreted. What was once a future requirement becomes a present liability. The intermediary adjusts their record to reflect this change. Households with outstanding balances are marked for attention, not with urgency but with priority. The system does not treat all entries equally once debt appears. It reorganizes its focus. There is also a shift in how time interacts with the record. The missed payment creates a past that remains active. Each new cycle does not replace the last. It builds on it. The individual is no longer moving from one obligation to the next. They are carrying prior obligations forward. You observe that additional charges may be applied in some cases. These are not always uniform. They depend on local practice, administrative decisions, or the structure of the obligation itself. Whether through formal interest or added penalties, the total increases without requiring new activity from the household. The presence of debt changes how the system views reliability. A household that meets its obligation each cycle is processed routinely. A household that carries debt is monitored differently. Records are reviewed more closely. Interactions become more frequent. There is no single moment where this change is announced. It is reflected in the way the system returns to the household. More attention, more verification, more tracking. The process remains calm, but the pattern shifts. You see that debt does not need to be large to be significant. Even a small shortfall, once recorded, creates a new layer that must be addressed. The system does not distinguish between causes. It records outcomes. The household responds by attempting to manage both the current obligation and the accumulated balance. Resources are divided. Decisions are made with two pressures in mind: what must be paid now and what remains from before. You notice that the system does not provide a clear end point for debt unless it is fully resolved. Partial payments reduce the balance, but they do not remove the category. The entry remains until it reaches zero. Until then, it continues to influence how the system operates. There is also a persistence in how debt is tracked. It is not confined to a single record. It appears in summaries, reports, and lists used by officials at different levels. The information moves upward, just as the original assessment did. This ensures that the condition is recognized beyond the local context. You remain aware that nothing about this process requires confrontation. The system does not need to apply force to create pressure. The existence of the record and its continuation across time is sufficient. The individual is now defined by two measures: what is expected and what remains. Both are written. Both are carried forward. The system has not changed its structure. The system has expanded its memory. The system does not rely on a single form of payment. When monetary fulfillment is incomplete or absent, the process does not stop. It shifts. The obligation remains tied to value, but the form of that value becomes flexible. Recovery is approached through what is available rather than what was originally expected. You observe how alternatives are identified. Goods are the first to be considered: stored grain, livestock, crafted items. These are not measured for their immediate use to the household. They are evaluated for their ability to be converted into equivalent value. The intermediary assesses what can be taken without needing to consult the original structure of assessment again. The record provides the amount owed. The local context provides the means of meeting it. You notice that this process is procedural. It follows patterns that are understood within the system. Certain goods carry recognized value. They can be accepted, recorded, and transferred upward or exchanged locally. The system has experience in converting these items into the form required at higher levels. Land is treated differently. It is not moved or consumed in the same way as goods. Instead, it is reassigned. Control over a portion of land may be transferred to satisfy part of the obligation. This transfer is recorded and recognized within the same administrative structure that tracks tax liability. Labor is another form of recovery. When goods and land are insufficient or unavailable, time and effort are used as substitutes. Work is assigned in a way that aligns with the needs of the state or local administration. The value of this labor is calculated and applied against the outstanding balance. You see that these methods are not improvisations. They are part of the system's design. The ability to convert different forms of value ensures that collection can continue under varying conditions. The intermediary manages this process with reference to both the central record and their local understanding. They determine what is practical to collect and how it can be applied. The goal is not to match the original form of payment. It is to satisfy the recorded value. There is a sequence to how recovery unfolds. Monetary payment is expected first. When it is not provided, goods are considered. If goods are insufficient, land or labor may follow. Each step extends the process without requiring a full reset. You notice that each action is documented. Goods taken are listed. Land transfers are recorded. Labor assignments are noted with duration and value. These entries are added to the existing record, ensuring that the reduction of the obligation is visible and verifiable. The system does not treat recovery as an exception. It is an extension of the collection. The same calm, structured approach is maintained. There is no need for escalation when the process itself provides alternatives. You observe how this affects the household. Resources are reallocated. Items that support daily operation are removed or reduced. Land that once produced value is no longer under the same control. Time that could be used for personal or local activity is directed elsewhere. The system does not evaluate the long-term impact of these changes on the household. Its focus remains on fulfilling the recorded obligation. Once value is extracted and applied, the entry is adjusted accordingly. You also see that recovery can occur over multiple cycles. It does not need to be completed at once. Partial fulfillment through goods or labor reduces the balance, but does not eliminate it. The process continues until the record reflects completion. There is a consistency in how this is handled across different households. While the specific goods or labor may vary, the structure remains the same. Value is identified, converted, and applied. You remain aware that the system does not need to exert visible force to achieve this. The presence of the obligation, combined with the methods available to satisfy it, is enough to guide behavior. The individual adapts to what can be given, rather than what was originally expected. The system accepts the form and records the value. The record does not remain private. You begin to notice how information moves beyond the archive and into the local environment. Payment status, while recorded formally, becomes visible through routine activity. The system does not need to announce it openly. It is understood through patterns that repeat. Collection does not occur in isolation. It is conducted in places where others are present or aware. The arrival of the intermediary, the order in which households are approached, and the frequency of return visits all signal something about status. These signals are subtle, but they are consistent enough to be recognized. You observe how regular payment creates a stable pattern, A household meets its obligation within the expected period, the record is marked, and attention shifts elsewhere. There is little reason for the intermediary to return before the next cycle. This absence becomes a form of quiet confirmation. In contrast, repeated visits indicate something different. When the intermediary returns more than once within a cycle, or across cycles without resolution, it becomes visible that the obligation has not been met. No statement is required. The pattern itself communicates it. You see that this visibility is not limited to the intermediary's actions. Records may be referenced in local administrative spaces where others can observe their use. Lists are consulted, names are checked. The process of verification is not hidden, even if the details are not openly discussed. Reputation begins to form around these patterns. A household that consistently meets its obligation is treated as reliable, one that does not become associated with delay or deficiency. These associations influence how others interact with them. The system does not create this social layer directly. It allows it to develop by maintaining consistent procedures that can be observed. Over time, the community understands what these procedures indicate. You notice that this reduces the need for direct enforcement. When non-payment is visible, it carries its own pressure. The individual is aware that their position is known. This awareness can influence decisions about how to allocate resources and when to meet obligations. Local officials are part of this environment. They operate within the same community and are aware of how households are perceived. This awareness informs their approach. A household with a stable reputation may be given time to resolve a shortfall. Another with a pattern of delay may be approached more directly. You observe that this is not a formal system of punishment. It is a byproduct of visibility. The system records and processes information. The community interprets the patterns that emerge from that process. There is also a feedback loop. As reputation influences behavior, behavior reinforces reputation. A household that is known to meet its obligations may prioritize maintaining that standing. One that is already associated with delay may find it more difficult to change that perception. The intermediary uses this environment as part of their work. They do not need to apply the same level of attention to every household. The social context provides additional information that helps guide their efforts. You see that the system benefits from this layer without needing to manage it directly. It extends the reach of the formal structure into everyday interaction. The obligation is no longer only a number in a record. It is part of how the individual is recognized within the community. There is no moment where this visibility is introduced. It develops gradually as the system operates. Each cycle reinforces it. Each interaction adds to it. You remain aware that nothing in this process requires overt display. The system continues to function through records, schedules, and intermediaries. The social layer forms around it, quietly shaping behavior. The obligation is now present in two places, in the record and in how the individual is seen. The system does not forget. You follow the record as it moves through time. Each cycle adds a new layer, but the previous ones remain. Paid amounts are marked. Outstanding balances are carried forward. Nothing is removed unless it is fully resolved. You observe how continuity is maintained across administrative changes. Officials may be replaced, intermediaries may shift roles, but the records persist. New hands work with the same entries. The structure does not depend on any single person to maintain it. The archive grows as more entries are added. Scrolls are stored, referenced, and occasionally reorganized. Older records are not discarded simply because they are no longer current. They provide context. They show how obligations have been met or left unresolved over time. You notice that this creates a form of long-term tracking. A household's history is visible across multiple cycles. Patterns of payment, delay, and recovery can be seen in sequence. This information informs how the system approaches the household in the present. Debt, once recorded, does not fade with time. It remains active until it is addressed. If it is carried across several cycles, it becomes a stable part of the record. The system treats it as an ongoing condition rather than a temporary state. You see that this persistence can extend beyond the individual. When a household changes, whether through inheritance or reassignment, the record is adjusted to reflect the new structure. The obligation may be transferred along with it. The system maintains continuity even as the people within it change. Resolution requires a formal process. Payment is recorded, the balance is reduced. When it reaches zero, the entry is marked as complete. Until that point, it remains open. There is no informal way to close it. The record must show completion. You observe how this affects behavior over time. The knowledge that obligations persist encourages alignment with the system. Delays are not erased by waiting. They remain and accumulate. The only way to remove them is through fulfillment. The system also uses this long memory to maintain consistency across regions and periods. Reports generated from these records provide information about overall collection, outstanding balances, and patterns of compliance. This information moves upward and informs broader administrative decisions. You notice that the system does not require constant attention to maintain this memory. Once recorded, entries remain available for reference. They can be accessed when needed, compared with new data and used to guide action. There is stability in this design. It allows the system to operate over long periods without losing track of individual obligations. Even as conditions change, the record provides a fixed point that can be returned to. You remain aware that this persistence shapes the experience of the individual within the system. The obligation is not limited to the present. It extends into the future until it is resolved. It may also reflect the past, carrying forward what has not been completed. The structure remains calm and consistent. There is no need for urgency when the system can rely on time and memory to maintain pressure. There is no rush and nothing is forgotten. The record remains in place, ready to be opened again when the next cycle begins. The record rests where it was left, its surface undisturbed. The room is quiet again, with only the faint presence of what has already been written and carried forward. Nothing moves, yet the system continues in its steady rhythm, unchanged by the moment. Here in the archive, even the smallest systems hold entire worlds together. If this quiet history brings you rest, you are welcome to return.